Okay, so just a review of last time we had this example in which we had the equivalent units of production using weighted average. Remember, we're going to look at two methods, weighted average and Fifo. We should definitely have time to get into the Fifo today and look at some of the quiz questions that I put up on Canvas. It's quiz question 4B, okay, up on Canvas for the 4B section. We'll go through those slides as well. So remember, we talked about that we have to account for the units that were transferred out and then the equivalent units in ending work in process. We said that under the equivalent units of production method, we don't worry about units that were already in progress at the beginning of the period. We just assume that all of that work was done this period, okay? And so we had sort of this way of looking, if they tell us the 5,400 units transferred out, that's fine. If not, we may have to compute it by coming up with the beginning units plus the units added for the period gives us total units available, minus the units that are in ending inventory would give us the units transferred out if they don't just give us the number, which in this case they did. Okay? So then we just went ahead and we took the units that were completed and transferred out, and to get to the equivalent units, you simply add the equivalent units of ending work in process, which there were a total of 900 units. If they were 60% complete at the end of the period, then the presumption is that we completed 540 equivalent units of work this period for materials. In this example, for labor was 30%, so that's labor and overhead conversion cost. It was 270. Okay, that gave us the equivalent units, and then we used that number to help us to calculate the cost of the equivalent units of production, cost per unit. And for weighted average, we take the beginning inventory plus the cost added for this period. That gives us the total cost that we're going to have in our numerator. We divide that by the equivalent units of production, and that then gives us a cost per equivalent unit. You see that that's what we did. We took the beginning for materials and conversion. We took the cost added, that was the total cost, divided it by the equivalent units. That gave us a cost per unit. And the main thing for weighted average, that figure gives me the cost of the items that I'm transferring out. Okay, so they show us that you could calculate the ending inventory equivalent units by using those figures, and that's more of a check number to me. The key thing is getting that 5,400 times the cost per equivalent unit for both our conversion, our materials, give us the cost transferred out. And then they had this sheet here where they sort of let us reconcile the cost, and it was the cost of beginning inventory plus the cost added with the total cost to account for. 194,400 were transferred out. We just calculated that from the previous calculation of the 5,400 units transferred out times the cost per equivalent unit, and then the amounts in our ending work in progress, which we had calculated, back here when we picked up the number of equivalent units in the ending work in process times the cost per equivalent unit. But what I was showing you last time is the ending inventory comes along for the ride, okay? And so you get that for free. And then if you sit there and you have what? Beginning 10,039, let me cut off. Lights too. You take that 10,039, you add the cost, 199,751 they told me, that gives me total available, 209,790, minus the amount that's transferred out, gives me the ending inventory, and I would just use this calculation that they showed me here of how to come up with the cost using the cost per equivalent unit for ending inventory as a simple check figure to make sure that I've done my work correctly and it ties up and I'm good to go. Okay, so we talked about that last time, and we did a couple problems here, which I'm not going to redo these. This was just a couple of easy calculations of how you get the number of equivalent units. Okay, I'm not going to repeat those. We did those two. Okay, the one that I want to jump us to here is how do we come up with the cost per equivalent unit. This was a more comprehensive question, so let's look at this one. And we went through this one last time, but we were kind of putting it in towards the end, and I would imagine you might have thought about a couple other things over the weekend and, you know, equivalent units of production. So let's just review, okay? All right, so we look at this problem, and they give us some information. We say, according to the company's records, the conversion cost in the beginning inventory in work in process was $68,064 at the beginning of June. We had additional conversion cost of $585,324 were incurred in the department during the month, and what was the cost per equivalent unit this problem wanted to know. Now, again, I kind of had this weird way of doing it when I wrote this in at one time, where I would start with the units started, subtract off the ending inventory since they weren't done with those, add in the beginning inventory, would give me the cost added to production. That's admittedly a little bit backwards. You know, the more you stare at this stuff, the more you look at it and say, well, why was I doing it this way? I can't answer to you why I was doing it that way before, because that's a little backwards. I mean, to me, the better way to do it would have been to take what? The beginning is 24,000. What? Excuse me?
This is the beginning 68,064.
That's the cost. I'm using the units right now. So 24,000. I'm just showing you how you get to this 91,000. Okay, so it's the beginning of the 24 plus what? Plus the units started in production is what? 86,000?
Mm-hmm.
So that gives us what? A total available here of, huh? Say that loudly, please, with good articulation so I can hear you. 110,000? Okay. Gives me 110,000 minus what? Minus the 19,000, good, that are in ending inventory is where I ended up getting a better way to me to calculate the 91,000. You get the same number, but this to me is a little more rational way of doing it, a more straightforward way of doing it, whatever. Okay, so we know we have 91,000 are the units that were transferred out, but then we have to figure out, give ourselves credit for the work that we've done on those units that were in ending inventory, and the problem told us that they were 20% done. So I go ahead and I take that 19,000 times the 20%, so I get 3,800, add that to the 91,000, so my equivalent units are 94,800, okay? Once I know that, I'm going to take all the cost, and it's the cost of what? The cost both in the beginning inventory and the cost what? Added for the period, at least we do that under the weighted average method, gives me a total of 653,388. I divide that by the equivalent units. That gives me the cost per equivalent unit, this 6.89222784. Okay, now that was the answer to this problem. That's all you had to do to get this one correct. But then I went ahead and I just went a little bit further and said, okay, but let's, what good is a cost per equivalent unit from the standpoint of accountants if it doesn't end up in a journal entry? Okay, so there'd be an expectation that you would know the journal entry that would follow on to this. And so all I did was I said, well, we started out with what? 68,064 is our beginning balance of work in process. The problem told us that, right? They told us that we added cost for the period of what? 585,324. I mean, that's just coming right out of the problem. Okay, so we go ahead and we add those costs. So we have these costs in there, and then we just get the cost of the units transferred out. How many units do we transfer out? How many units did we transfer out? 91,000. 91,000 times that big long number, cost per equivalent unit. That's that same number that I came up with down here. I multiply that by the 91,000 units we transferred out, and that gives me the 627,19733. That becomes the what? Credit to work in process, and the debit to what? Finished goods. Okay, by definition, if it comes out of work in process, it's going into finished goods, right? Just writing that same number in there. Comes out of work in process into finished goods. What do we call that number? The number that comes out of work in process and goes into finished goods. Cost of goods manufactured. So I could very easily have asked you in this problem, what's the cost of goods manufactured, right? Okay, and the answer is what? The 197.33. Okay, and that number comes out of my work in process, and I'm left with what? 26,190.67. And what I was saying earlier when we were looking at the slides there, we simply can use that number, use that cost per equivalent unit times the number of equivalent units in the ending inventory, which we determined to be 3,800, to what? To basically prove that we've accounted for all our costs here now, right? Okay, we went through that last time. Question? Okay, good. So that's kind of a lot on that one slide there, just so you can see it all. And I still have to post up. I don't think I posted up 4A yet, did I? Still have to post that up. Question?
I recognize where the numbers coming from right there a little bit. I was going to ask you about the 3,800 times the 620.92, but then I realized that's from the 90,000.
Yeah, that's the equivalent units in ending inventory. And again, ending inventory, if you credit the work in process for the right amount, the ending inventory will have the right amount in it, right? And then you can just verify it to make sure everything's, it's accounting. You like everything. Once you start studying accounting, you start having, problems like you start to see, you'll be out with your friends and you'll say, yeah, there's 4 things. And you'll sit there and you'll go through 3 and you can't remember the 4th. And you'll sit there the rest of the night trying to remember the 4th one. While everyone else is having a good time. That's the burden of being an accountant. We'll say, well, there's one missing still. Okay? So just so that everything works out for us, we go ahead and we make everything balanced. Okay? Question? Okay, good. Let's take a look. I don't know, did we do these other ones or not? No? Okay, so these are pretty easy. Well, this one actually is a good one to look at because it's a little bit different the way it's worded, that you can't sit there and say beginning inventory plus the units added give us units available minus ending inventory gives the units transferred out. Can't do this with this problem because they don't give you the information that way. So you have to sit there and kind of shift up your reading comprehension a little bit and say at the beginning of the most recent period, there were 900 units of product in the department, 35% complete, which of course does not matter under the weighted average method, which is what we're still looking at here. These units were finished and an additional 5,000 units were started and completed during the period, and 800 units were still in process. So they don't really give us that they started a new set of units plus whatever was in beginning inventory. They simply tell us what? That we had the 5,000 units were started, and then we did what? We also completed the 900 that were in process at the beginning of the period. So to get the units completed and transferred out, since they told us we completed the beginning units plus the units that were started for the period were also completed, you get the units completed and transferred out that way. So it's just a little different of a problem. You can't take beginning inventory plus the units added minus the ending inventory because they don't give you the information that way. Okay, so then they tell us what? We had the ending work in process was 800 units times what? Times the 25% complete from the problem. So we have equivalent units of 200. So our equivalent units are 6,100. And we get to stop there with that one. There was no need to sit here and have to figure out a cost per equivalent unit. So I put that problem in just because the way you got to the equivalent units was a little different than some of the other ones we had looked at. Okay, all right, good. Let's look at this one. Meta line. What's meat line? Meta line. Corp used the weighted average method for inventory costs and had the following information available for the year. And we have beginning work in process, which is 40% complete, which is irrelevant. Ending work in process is 400 units, 80% complete. Total units started during the year. So for this one, you have to do what? And let's just, a little easier than to read my writing, to look here. You start with the 200 units that were in beginning work in process. The units started were 3,200. That gives us what? A total of 3,400 available. Minus the what? Minus the ending. That gives us 3,000 units transferred. And then for the ending work in process, it's the 400 units times the what? 80% complete. You add those in. Okay. So again, we had looked at some problems earlier where you just calculate the equivalent units. Okay. All right, good. Let's look at this one now. And for this one, we're going to go ahead and see what we come up with the cost per equivalent unit. And so if we want the cost per equivalent unit, we have to pick up the units what? Completed and transferred were 135. Okay, and the units, they just gave us that. Now, if they give us that number, then we don't have to calculate it at all, right? They just told us. Did they tell us that number? No? Okay, so I guess we did have to calculate it. So let's go ahead and do it. So it's the beginning inventory, which was what? 25,000. Okay. And they tell us that they did what? 110,000 units were started. Okay, and so if we have 110 units being started, what does that give us? This 135? Okay. Then what? Then they tell us that there were, why is this not looking like it's going to work out? Completed and transferred 25,000 units were processed at the beginning, 110 units that were started and completed. At the end of March, there were 30,000 units that were in process in production. So I guess for this one, we have to go ahead and assume that they went ahead and completed this full 135. So this one's a little bit different also. You can't just take off the ending inventory here because you only get the 110 if you do. So for this one, you have to go ahead and pick up the 25,000 plus the units that were started, since they're telling us those were started and completed, and we have to assume that we finished the 25,000 units that were in beginning inventory. So that's where they got that 135. And then we have what? 30,000 units are sitting there. An additional 30,000 units. That's why it won't work if you do it that way, because then they say an additional 30,000 units. So you take the additional 30,000 units and they tell us that those were 100% done with respect to materials. And so since we're doing what? Since we're doing materials here, we come up with the equivalent units by taking the 100% done times the 30,000, adding those to the 135, that's 165 equivalent units. We pick up all the costs, both the costs what? In beginning inventory and the costs that were added for the period. Not necessarily in that order as I circled them. We pick up those two costs, the beginning and the costs added for the period. That gives us the numerator divided by the equivalent units, gives us 210 per equivalent unit. Okay, so again, the question might be, well, what do you do with that number? So if I have work in process, and work in process has at the beginning what? These cost of 93,550. Okay. 95,350, and then I go ahead and I add what? 253 for the period. So that gives me a total of what? 253 plus 93, 550. 93, is it 500 or 550? So 253 plus 253,000 plus 93,550. You're telling me is how much?
No, it's not 93,550. It's 93,500.
Oh, 93,500. Okay. And I add this number plus the other number, and that gives me what? 346,500. You say? Okay. So that's the total that's available, and then we just said that we transferred out what? Oh, well, we have to figure that out. It's 210 times, and we transferred out what? The 135,000 units? So 210 is my cost per equivalent unit, and I'm transferring out what, 135,000 units, they tell me? So 210 times 135 is, that's impossible. 135,000 times $2.10 is what? 283,500. Okay, is that what you said? I only heard the 83,500. So 346,500 minus 283,500 is 63,000. Okay, which would be the cost of what? The items that are still in ending inventory at 210 a pop. 210 then times what? The number of units that are sitting there still in ending inventory, equivalent units we said were 30,000. Hopefully that works out what? Close to 63,000. Might have a little rounding in there. I don't know how they rounded this. Okay. And you can always do that last number as a check. I mean, the journal entry will give it to you, but if you want to check your work, you can do that. Okay. Question? Okay. Let's quickly look at this one. They tell us, I think it's the same, very similar fact pattern, if not the same. Production department of a process operations system completed and transferred 65,000 units. So they give that to us. If they give us the units completed and transferred, we don't have to worry about another thing. We don't have to take beginning inventory plus, the units added, any of that. We just pick that number up, 100% complete, right? Then they tell us that there were 15,000 in ending inventory that was what? 80% complete, so that's 2,000 units. That gives us equivalent units, 77,000. We pick up the cost in what? Beginning inventory and the cost added for the period. That's the 57,005 and the 183 that was given in the problem. You add those two together and you divide that by the equivalent units. That gives you the cost per equivalent unit. Okay. Now, just the theory I have is that staying awake during the class, not sleeping during the class, will potentially enhance your understanding of this. I'm thinking if you're sleeping through the whole class, that your chances of understanding are greatly diminished. I'm just thinking. I could be wrong. And if I'm looking at you, you weren't the one sleeping. Okay? Okay, good. And I'm not going to go through that process of then we transfer them out and then you can verify the ending inventory. We've done that enough time. But I could give you the same question maybe and then just ask you for the journal entry. What's the debit to finished goods? What's the credit for work in process? What's the value of the ending inventory? I can go anywhere with this cost per equivalent unit, right? Once I've asked you to calculate it. Okay? All right, good. Now, that's weighted average, okay? And some companies may use weighted average. It is less accurate than what we're about to learn, which is FIFO. So, more companies would probably use FIFO just because they want to have their records be more accurate, okay? Well, the weighted average, I guess, might be a little easier from a record-keeping standpoint. I don't know, but I think most companies would probably just go ahead and use FIFO, and it makes sense to use FIFO. With financial accounting, we get all up into, well, you could use FIFO for GAAP purposes, even though your goods don't actually flow that way, and you could use LIFO, and you could use weighted average, and even though your goods don't really flow in that direction, you could decide to use LIFO because you want to have a better tax advantage, right? But if we're talking about production company, it makes sense that stuff flows out what? In a FIFO manner, because you can't send stuff out until it's done. So we have to put the materials in, we have the equivalent units, everything's going to go in FIFO direction. So FIFO for a manufacturer tends to be, it's almost, I can't think of a production where you'd send stuff out before it's done, where you'd be using LIFO or something. It just doesn't even make sense. So FIFO is the more, I forgot though. What I forgot to do you want to look at some of the other homework questions for 4A, or you want to go look at FIFO here first? There were a couple more homework quiz questions for 5A that weren't embedded in the slides. You want to look at those first? Looking at weighted average? Okay, let's do that first, then we'll come back to look at this. So FIFO will have to wait for a minute. And okay, there it is. Before we do that, though, just to make sure we're sort of all on the same page here, don't forget, guys, that we have class today, obviously, in which I'm hoping we'll finish chapter 4. Okay, and then next time we will do the midterm prep, and then a week from today's midterm 1, right? Okay. You want to have it Wednesday instead of Monday? I'm indifferent, but if it sounds like you're getting shot down by your colleagues here. Yeah, no, you're not talking about this. He's not talking about this coming Wednesday. He wants to push it back 2 days to what, the 23rd? I mean, to the 28th? Huh?
That's a possibility.
28th instead of the 26th? How many want to do the 28th instead of the 26th? What's the problem with you guys that don't want to do it? You have what?
Can you do like a week
Well, what's the problem? I mean, we're wrapping up chapter 4. You're going to get chapter 4 wrap up next time. We're going to do a review, and then you have the whole weekend to study, and then you come in here and you take the test on the scheduled date. What's gone wrong? What's gone wrong that No, I'm just trying to understand what happened with your absorption of the material.
No, what happened, Professor, like last week I was sick, so I missed one class and catch up.
Okay.
So
No,
I'm coming sick and then we're getting sick. And I understand front students are smarter than me, so they want to...
Well, no, come on now. Don't go through life like that. Okay? I mean, we're hearing your case and we're trying to consider everybody's, and it's not that they're smarter. She has 3 other tests on the same day, so she's got a reason too that she wants to do it, and we can come up with something. Look, I'm never going to please everybody. That I know. I've been at this long enough that somebody's going to go on Rate My Professor and say, he's sick and he made me take the test anyway. I had 3 other midterms and he made me take the test the same day. So I know I'm not going to please everybody. Okay, but what we can do, okay, is let's do this. We will take the test on the scheduled date, okay, but the compromise, I'm going to be like King Solomon here, okay, the compromise will be that we won't add the Fifo discussion. So we're just going to stick with weighted average, and then we'll push Fifo into the next test, okay, so you're not having to absorb some new material today, and then next time maybe we're still trying to catch up, okay? Deal? Okay. All right, and we'll look at Fifo because it's just a few small differences, and that's good because my personal belief is what makes this Fifo versus weighted average hard is it's hard to hold them both in your mind at the same time. You understand weighted average, and it kills Fifo. You understand Fifo, and it kills weighted average, and they're constantly murdering each other in your head, and you can't keep them together. So we'll go ahead, huh?
Would it be possible to have a vote just to see if we can do it next Wednesday, not push the week back for no, or just the next one?
I have an idea. How about we do it online?
That will have me sitting there cranking into online material that doesn't take into Canvas and whatnot. So I'm not taking that. I'm not bearing that cross. So we'll do it on Monday as scheduled without Fifo. Okay. So in other words, everything we've studied up until now is what's on the test, which means we're going to finish these homework problems today, and then when we come back next time, we're going to spend the entire class doing a review for the midterm, and that should be plenty for you guys to put one foot in front of the other, like the Winter Warlock, and walk into Christmas Town or whatever it is. You guys are too young to know what that means, I guess.
So is it just going to be multiple choice or?
Yes, 30 multiple choice questions.
So you get a Scantron?
Yeah, you need a Scantron. You need to bring the skinny green Scantron is the one the machine takes. 30 multiple choice questions.
Professor, do you give some credit, like, even by chance without long answers that you can see,
No. No. The only thing that I will give you credit for is if the question ends up being screwy and you prove it to me that there's something wrong with the question, I'll add those points back. Because sometimes I look at a question, I'm like, oh, that looks like a good question, and I paste it up there and I don't sit there and pore over it like you're going to during the exam. And then during the exam, you may find some deficiency in that problem. And if you do, then I'll credit back the points for that. Did I see another hand over here? Okay, all right, so that's what we'll do. So let's just go ahead and let's look at a couple of these then that were still weighted average. Where was I getting the quiz? Now, you'll still see 4A, 4B quiz up on Canvas, but we're only going to take, it's not 4A, it just says Chapter 4. Those are the only questions that are relevant to your midterm, okay? We'll do 4B afterwards. So, okay, I think we already did this one. Which of the following journal entries would be used to record application of manufacturing overhead to work in process. We did this one, and the answer here is B. You debit work in process per department, right? And you would credit the manufacturing overhead as you apply that manufacturing overhead, and you do it by department then, instead of by job number like we did for job order costing. So we looked at that one. Which of the following companies would most likely be most likely to use process costing? And I don't know. Huh? Okay. How about this Fabian? We did this one too, right? How about Navar? Did we do Navar Corporation, whatever this is? I don't think so. We did? No. Okay, let's look at this one. It's easy. Okay, so we say, what are the equivalent units of production in the lubricating department? And they tell me here that they had the beginning work in process completed and transferred to the next department. Do I have to do anything else if they give that to me? I just pick up that, what, 37,100 plus what? Plus the, and we had the, what? We don't worry about the beginning work that was done there, at least not for weighted average, which is all we're worrying about for our test. So we pick up, what, the 9,600? And we give ourselves credit for how much work being done this period? 80%. We multiply that out, 9,600 times 0.8 gives me, they show me here, 7,680 right here. Gives me the equivalent units. Okay. Easy enough? Okay. Okay, good. Let's take a look at this one. And here, we did this one, right? This is the one we just got done doing. Not marked up, though. So that might be a good place to practice, since it's not marked up. And what I would do, guys, is I would, when you're studying, just cover those. I mean, those don't help you in any way. Even for these problems, you can't figure it out by just eyeballing the number. You got to go through too much. But I would cover these choices up and see if you can come up with the number without peeking at that choice. And then you should be able to, from memory, continue on, okay, what would be the journal entry for the units transferred out? What should be the value of the ending inventory, etc., right? And you got a clean piece of paper right here to work with it. Just print this out, act like you're taking the test. Okay? Okay, good. I'll say that with this stuff from Chapter 4, Chapter 5 too, with the applying the applying the manufacturing overhead, the over, under applied, etc. If you think that you're going to read through the solutions and walk in here and do it, think again. That ain't going to happen. That will betray you on test day. You'll sit here and you'll think, oh, okay, yeah, I've read these now 3 or 4 times. I see how they did this. And you think you can walk in and you can do it? Can't do it, guys. It won't work. I need winners. Can't do it. Can't play with them. Can't work. Sorry. You guys don't know who that is either? Coach of the 49ers when he got mad at the players. Anyway, okay. So, you can't do that. You can't sit there and think that, you can just watch me do them or just read the solutions and think that you're going to be able to do it. You got to really, so I would cover up the answers and act like you're doing these from scratch. Okay, but let's do this one, and I'll ask you for some help here along the way. Paxton Corporation, we're, of course, going to use weighted average. Molding department is the second department. We didn't do this one? Okay. The accounting records give us some beginning inventory, give us some cost added, and they want us to figure out the equivalent units. So who wants to do the equivalent units for me? Set it up for me. Come on, you people that wanted the test on Monday. Yes, speak to me. Huh? Okay, completed and transferred. We know we got those 50,300. Good. What's your name again? Joanne. Okay, good, Joanne. Then what? 9,400 times the 20%. Done we are. Good. And you're giving me the equivalent unit calculation. 52,000, huh? 5,000, 9,400 times 0.2, guys. You can help her out. I mean, just because she's in the elite front row here doesn't mean that she can't answer. 1,880.
Yes.
Like that?
Yes.
Like the freeway? Okay, so 52,180. Okay, thank you. So 52,180 is the equivalent units, right? Okay, but I got to come up with the cost per equivalent unit. So what do you want me to do now? You want me to take the beginning inventory of 10,973 plus what? Plus the costs that were added, the 268,107. Good, and I get those two together, and that gives me 279,080. You say? And we divide that by what? By the 52,180. Okay, and hopefully we get something in the ballpark of this 5348. Can you give me that big old number, whatever's in your calculator? 5.348, and you got another 4 in there?
Yeah.
Like that? Okay, good. That's the cost per equivalent unit, right? Right? Okay, so who wants to give me the journal entry now using T accounts to get that out of the work in process? Because we started with what? The beginning balance was 10,973, wasn't it? And then we added what? 268,107. Hello? Okay. And so I ended up with what here? Total available. 10,973 plus 268. Say it again, sir. 279 what? 080, like that?
Yes.
Okay, good. So that's the total cost. Thank you. That's the total cost that we're sitting in there. Okay, and now I need to transfer some cost out, don't I? So how am I going to get that? I have my number that my buddy gave me up here, 53484, right? To make sure we're avoiding some rounding error. Times what? Good. Times the units that got transferred out were 50,300. Gives me a total cost transferred out of 5.3484 times 50,300 units. 269,024, you say? 0.52? Okay, great. And so when I go ahead and I transfer out 269,024, I always make my T counts too small to fit these stupid numbers in here. Don't you hate numbers? Okay, so we got what? 269,024 what? 52 gives me what? $10,000 what? 055 what? 38 you say? 48? 055 48? 48? 055 48? Okay. So the journal entry then was to credit work in process and debit what? Debit finished goods for that same number. I'm not going to rewrite it. It goes out of work in process and into finished goods, right? So can we check that ending inventory figure? We should be able to take the 53484 and multiply it times the equivalent units, which we said are what, 1880? And we should get something pretty close to this number right here. It's a little rounding error. What do we get?
10,054.
Yeah, okay.
0.992.
054. Okay, close enough, right? Point what? 992. 992. Okay. So a little bit of rounding error in there. I'm not going to trip off of a dollar or whatever many cents that comes up to. Question? Number of units transferred out times the cost per equivalent unit. Those costs come out, they go into finished goods, and we're left in ending inventory with what? With the costs per unit times what? Times the number of units in ending inventory, equivalent units in ending inventory, right? Thought somebody was going to bring their kids today. What happened? Oh, they're here? Oh, okay. I never want to pass up the opportunity to scare the next generation. All right. There they are. They're studying hard. They're going, hey, we're taking the test on Monday. I don't care if we take it. Okay, good. Geez, they're such good kids. I didn't even know they were here. It's pretty good. Okay. All right, good. All right, let's go ahead and let's take a look at, what is this, another one? What is this? What are these numbers to? Solution to what? It's kind of a weird spot for the solution, like the problem before that or something. I don't know where that solution's coming from. That looks like the other problem we did, right? I don't know what it's doing there. Anyway, it's out of place. Okay. Equivalent unit for conversion costs. We didn't do this one. Do we need to do this one? Okay. So we've got what? Well, this one completed and transferred 9,000 they gave me. Thank you, God. And then I simply do what? I simply pick up the what? The units in ending work in process, because that's December 31st, right? That's how I know it's the end. And I go ahead and I multiply that by 5,000, and then they tell me that it was, and sometimes you got to be careful, was 80% complete for materials, but what? 45% complete for conversion costs. So make sure you pick up the right one, because sometimes the problems will give you a couple, one for materials, one for conversion costs. Typically, and unless it's a weird product, the materials should be further along than the conversion cost, right? You usually put in the materials and then we start converting them. You don't usually have people, waving their arms around in empty, production facilities, and then we dump a bunch of materials on them and the stuff gets produced. So usually the materials number is going to be ahead of the conversion cost number, right? Okay. Okay, good. Let's take a look at this one, another equivalent units. We did this one, right? No? Well, let's do it anyway. It's so simple. Okay. 4,000 units transferred, and then what? And then the 3,000 units in ending inventory. 80% complete for materials. So I take the 80%. Okay. I thought you had to pay good money for drugs to make that happen. Okay, there it goes. Okay. And so we've got what? The 30,000 times the 80%? Okay. Okay, good. How about this one? Clarkson Company uses a process costing system. The company requisitioned 93,000 materials for Department A and 67,000 of materials for Department B. What's the journal entry? Debit the work in process for the two different departments. Credit the raw materials, right? Comes out of raw materials and goes into work in process. I'm not sure why I put a 9 here. Oh, because that was 8. That would be a good reason to put 9 there, right? You know that 9 comes after 8. Why was 10 afraid of 7? Because 7, 8, 9. Okay. All right. You guys got this one, right? We did this one. We just did this one, right? Oh, good. Here's another one of those more kind of comprehensive ones. Okay, so we have what? We want to use the cost per equivalent unit for the department using the weighted average method, which everything's going to be weighted average. So we've got, what, 65 units transferred? So are those done? So we can count those. And then we have what? At the end of March, 15,000 additional units that were 80% complete as to materials. And of course, we're looking for materials here. That's the only thing they give us the information to work with. So we take the 15,000 times what? 0.8 gives me 12,000 what? 12,000, thank you. Okay, so 65,000 times 12,000 is 77,000 is the equivalent units. Okay, now what do I do? You're going to pick up the cost both in what? Both that were added and those in beginning. So 57,500 plus what? Plus 183,000 gives me a total of 240,500, like that. Divided by what? 77,000 gives me 312. Okay, good. Is that the big old number you get, or you get something a little different?
1, 2, 3, 4 instead of 1, 2.
3, 1, what? 2, 3, 4. Okay, good. All right, so if we wanted to do the journal entry stuff on this, if we wanted to do the work in process account, let's do it up here so we can kind of see the numbers we're working with. Of course, I'm always slammed in a corner when I do this. Okay, so what's the beginning balance? Say it again. 57,500. Good. Okay, and then I add what? 183,000, giving me now 240 even? 500? 240, 500? Okay, good. And then I want to figure out the cost that I'm going to transfer out. Cost that I'm going to transfer out is going to be my 3.1234. That's cool. Times what? Huh? Times the 65,000 units that got transferred out. Good. 3.1234 times 65,000 equals 203,021. Okay, good. And so when I go ahead and I credit that, I get an ending balance here of 37,479, you say?
Yep.
Like that? Okay, good. And just to verify that, I take this number 3.1234 times what? Times the 12,000 equivalent units in ending inventory, and I should get a number hopefully pretty close to 37479.
3748.
37 what?
480.
480.8. Okay, we always got some rounding in there, error in there somewhere. Uh huh.
Why do you do the accounts like that?
You mean with a balance on it?
Yeah.
Well, technically a T account is just debits and credits, right? But I find it from a teaching standpoint that it's a little bit easier to show the balances as we go along, because then I can sit there and I can say, okay, this number minus this number. Otherwise, we're sitting there and adding up a bunch of debits and subtracting a bunch of credits, and 52 people make 57 mistakes in that process, and I always end up spending the whole class trying to figure out why we keep getting the wrong number. Whereas if I do it this way, and I just show you the balances as we go, then you only have to subtract one number. Just from a teaching standpoint. I mean, that's basically, it's not technically a T account, it's a ledger account, which is what ledger accounts do. When you make debits and credits, they show the balances. Guys, she's only asking about your test. You might want to, I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm not going to ask you to do the T account.
I know, but like, maybe to find like
What?
well, my question is because I have like 3.12 and 65,000. I got a different number, so like, if I was to like be test, do I have to put 3.1?
Well, it's a multiple choice question, and so I will say something like the entry to record the transfer of the finished goods out of work in progress and then the finished goods or something would include which is the following or something, and it might say a debit to finished goods of 37,479. I mean, sorry, 203,021. This number right here, and then there'll be three other numbers that will be, like 50,000 off from that one. Okay, so you'll have to pick the obvious right answer. So I'm not going to have them within cents of each other. It'll be like, $70,000 difference. I'm not interested in your ability to round. Let somebody else teach you that. What is it, Math 71 or something?
So I have a question. So the total cost, like 240,500, is the total cost for the period?
240,500 was the beginning inventory plus the cost added for the period.
So it's 12.
It's the total costs that were available in my work in process, yes. And then I divide the equivalent units by that to get a cost per equivalent unit. And the only reason I keep going with it, the problems tend to like to stop there, because I guess they think they've achieved victory if they've made you calculate the cost per equivalent unit in managerial accounting class. And I'm like, hello, it's called managerial accounting, so we should know as accountants what to do with that cost per equivalent unit once we get it, which is simply what? That's the number we need to figure out the costs that are transferred. The ledger will give me the ending balance. My accounting system will tell me the ending balance, but a good internal control would be to take that cost per equivalent unit and multiply it times the number of units that we're assuming equivalent unit and make sure that that ties to what's in the ledger. If I was auditing you and you weren't doing that control, I would suggest that you get busy, because my guess is that you're going to have something screwy in there for some reason. So if you just sit there and just transfer out whatever and you don't check it back to see that it yields you the right ending balance, you're playing with fire. Okay. Is there another one here? Or is that it? That's it? Okay, let me show you quickly then what to start to look for next time. Just so we're all on the same page. Hang on a minute. I'm going to save this as the markup. I'll put this up too so you can see this. File. It's there. And then what I'm going to do, in fact, I'll do this before my next class starts. I think I should. Well, yeah, I think I should be able to. Is if this is your first time coming to class, I wouldn't spend too much time catching up with old friends. What I'm going to do is go ahead and underneath in Canvas, I am going to add a module called Practice Midterm Final, which I just did. I'm going to drag it up to the top so you can see it. I'll put it right under the syllabus here, Practice Midterm Final. Okay, and it's published now. There's obviously no content there. What I'll do is I'll sit down here before my next class starts and I'll find the practice midterm that I have somewhere in my files and I'll put it up there. Bring that next time either on your laptop or print it, whatever you want to do, and we'll work through it together. And that should be sufficient exercise to get us ready for the midterm. Okay, any question? All right, guys, I'll see you on Wednesday. We'll get ready for this midterm.